Yes, can you believe it? It is midnight. It is a little after midnight local time. I guess I'm auditioning for a replacement or a fill-in for Coast to Coast AM. But I didn't want to go 2 days, 2 days without adding on to our alphabetical run through ghost stories and the paranormal. I love doing this. I'm having fun doing this. I know we don't have a ton of live viewers, but I hope that it will live on in replays and on whatsyourghoststory.com. If you haven't been watching, I am going through at least once a day. Hopefully, at least once a day. I was hoping to do two. Maybe I'll do two tomorrow. A through Z. It's part of the A to Z blogging challenge, where each day you pick a new topic based on that letter of the alphabet. We today are up to the letter K, and you are going to hear me mispronounce some Native American, some First Nations words with all humility and respect, of course. But we are going to be talking about the Totem Pole in Chicago. Most people know it. It is such a landmark. It is right off of Lakeshore Drive. It looks straight down Addison Road. If you guys have ever been to Chicago and driven up or down Lakeshore Drive, you have probably passed it, even if you haven't noticed it. But it is this beautiful 40-foot tall totem pole, and we're going to get into some legends and lore about it. And it first. This totem pole, well, not this specific one, as we'll find out, it was replaced in the mid-1980s. But the original totem pole that stood here first came to Chicago from some British Columbia in Canada, and more specifically, Alert Bay is where this heralded from, as part of the 1893 World's Fair, which has already come up a time or two on this broadcast series. Of course, that was the Devil in the White City World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition of 1893. And it was part of a Native American village display. Of course, they were taking artifacts and showing ways of life all over the whole world. That's why it was the World's Fair. So this great 40-foot tall totem pole that is known as Kwanusila, Kwanusila, came from, like I said, British Columbia, from a Native American tribe up there. That Native American tribe is pronounced like this.
Kwakwakawak.
Kwakwakiwak. Kwakwakiwak.
Kwakwakawak.
I think that's close. Kwakwakiwak. And it tells the story of their origin. This totem pole, actually, let me pull up the totem pole itself so you can see what I'm talking about. It depicts a thunderbird perched at the top of a whale's tail. The whale is facing down, and there's a warrior riding its back with a spear or something like a spear in hand. And at the bottom, there's the face of a sea monster. So there's the sea monster face. And here you get the face of the whale. There's the warrior riding its back all the way up to this tail. And on the top of the tail is a thunderbird. And basically, there's a couple of minor variations of this origin story, but it talks about a man being alone up in this area in British Columbia. And he's completely in solitude and lonely. And he's trying to build up his town, his home, I should say, because he's tired of wandering around. He's tired of going from place to place. He wants to set up camp and establish a village. And he just doesn't have the strength to be able to lift these logs into place and to build a permanent home for himself. And there's a thunderbird sitting nearby. And he says, "Oh, man, if only you were a human, I wish you could help me with this." And the thunderbird raised its visor, and there was a human underneath it in costume, essentially. So he said, "Yeah, don't worry, man, I'll help you." And so he then, used the power, the supernatural power that the Thunderbird has to, "Thank you so much, but I don't want you to go. I'm still going to be lonely. I'll have a house, but I don't have anyone to share my life with. So would you mind also, we'll build a house for you too down the hill." And he said, "Oh yeah, that's cool, man." And then they end up building a second house, and the guy ends up shedding his Thunderbird costume, his outfit, his Superman cape, if you will, and setting it free to the heavens. And kind of saying, because it is a Thunderbird that he's setting free, the power and spirit of the Thunderbird clothing that he was wearing. He says, you can thunder on us, but don't thunder on us too often, please. And also, the thunder is supposed to be something of a memorial to anybody who dies in this village in the future. So I think even to this day, the idea is that when you hear thunder, we're remembering those who have gone before us. So it's an interesting story. Anytime you come up with this folkloric origin tales of how people came to be. So this is this totem pole. That's the story that this totem pole tells. So we have the Thunderbird on top, which of course is a guy in a costume, and then a whale because they are right on a bay. And then the warrior that we see riding the whale's back was that guy that was asking for help. I don't know. And maybe somebody else out there knows what is the deal with the sea monster head at the bottom. That sounds like a little bit of awesome color commentary that we don't have the gaps completely filled in for. And I've been seeing some people come up. If you want, by all means, please type in a chat. We're here to make this a conversation, not just a monologue, a diatribe. But I'm very happy to keep talking as well. So that is the story. Over the years, this thing is in Chicago. It came into Chicago in 1893. It was already about 100 years old, I believe, by the time this was put on display. Eventually, Kraft, Mr. Kraft from Kraft Cheese, as we know today, it was a collector of jade, apparently, and Native American artifacts of, I think, specifically this area. We're talking about the Pacific Northwest. And that is really where the totem pole constructors, the builders, they resided. And it's kind of interesting as you go around the country that there were certain areas that these were where the mound builders lived, but these are where the totem pole builders lived, which I never really thought about that before. But at the same time, we here in the Midwest, where I am right now, you don't really see or hear too much about totem poles. But apparently, yeah, that's the people that lived around here didn't really partake in that craft so much. But this area in the Pacific Northwest, not only were they known for this, but they were known for being so intricate with their designs, with the details that told the story. And that's where maybe some of the ghost stories begin to come from, out of this totem pole, because it is telling a sacred story. And first off, as I've written about, and I was able to verify just now, I was doing some additional research tonight. It's not just an urban legendy thing, but it is true that a totem pole is supposed to face the water. It is standing out there as kind of like the crest, the family crest or the tribal crest, indicating for anybody that's rowing up, canoeing up, paddling up to your village, who you are. It's telling identifying your village. And this one here at Lakeshore Drive in Addison is facing the city of Chicago. So its back is to Lake Michigan. And people have wondered, was that sacrilegious in some way to position it in such a way? So it was first, Kraft purchased it in 1926. It actually sat at his factory in Chicago for about 3 years and was placed in 1929. Actually, I got a great picture I found of the dedication ceremony. I'll show you that. I'll show it this way. So we do have a number of First Nations peoples down here at the base of the totem pole pointing up to it. And this was during the dedication ceremony in 1929. So in years, this is in Chicago. This is a rough place. It's the humidity in the summer is unspeakable, as is the wind chill and low temperatures in the winter. And this is made out of wood. It's one solid piece of cedar. So of course it's going to have some normal weathering, especially because, like I said, it's already over 100 years old, around 100 years old, and it was placed there in 1929. Let's jump ahead to, later in the 1900s. It is showing bad signs of wear. There's a crack that's beginning to form from just the constant freezing and thawing out. Understandably, the paint is fading away. So they enlist the help of whoever can, take the bid to fill the job to do the repainting and maintenance on it. And the person that they hire does not know what they're doing. They're not trained in this type of woodworking, and they're not trained in Native American lore and legends. So they don't really appreciate and understand how intricate some of the painting and the details. You can kind of see even in this grainy black and white photo that there's some very fine details, and probably way more if you were up close looking at it. So over the years, it began to, well, look like this. That almost looks more Asian than Native American. Look at the eyes going completely different style. They also used house paint, which actually began to eat away at the wood finish itself. So here's kind of a nice side by side of the two. You see some pretty drastic, bold differences in there. And eventually this thing was just in such bad shape. Plus, the 1970s comes around, and in Washington, D.C., there was a desecration, some massive vandalism in Washington, D.C. at the, it was a Native American Affairs building. And so to protest the vandalism, there were some Native Americans in the Chicago area that actually were trying to burn this down to kind of take, I guess in their mind, they were taking something of their ancestry back away from the city, because this was owned now. It was donated, but now by the Kraft family now, but it was donated to the city of Chicago. So the city of Chicago now owns it. It did not burn to the ground, fortunately, but some damage was done to it. Paint was splattered on it. It was even shot at one point in time. So, and as they were doing more and more research, they thought, well, let's take better care of this. As they're doing more research, they realized how rare this was, how old it was. And around this time, allegedly, we start to get our first paranormal stories coming out of it. That if you were to take photos of this structure, you'll get orbs, you'll get mists, you'll get those kind of eerie phantom images. In addition to that, and way more engaging, the warrior is not in the same position all the time. The warrior seems to be moving around. That's awesome, first off. And I'm going to put a call out there. I've heard this story said a lot, and I've never seen a photo that can back this up. I want to see, if you have, let's say your parents went there and took some pictures in front of it, post those photos. Even if, don't even worry about verifying the position of anything. Just post those photos. I'd love to see it and be able to, see if I can see any differences in it. But part of that, I think I may have debunked it a little bit tonight, as I was doing research and finding out about the poor quality of craftsmanship in the fixing, quote unquote, fixing that they were trying to do to the totem pole. They've totally moved the guy's arms around. So here is 1929, and we see the man, the warrior, holding a spear. See that pretty clear. He's kind of got one arm up, as if he's maybe about to throw this. Well, no, I guess more vertically, but he's got one arm up holding a spear. And if you look at this photo from 1967, it might as well be a baseball mascot, the way he's holding the spear like a baseball bat. He's ready to take the next pitch. Now, is that paranormal? Comparing these two photos? Probably not. I think it was a case of, well, this thing's weathering. And we end up finding out that there's dry rot around the warrior's arms. So they have to kind of reposition it to get it in shape. And maybe that's why people claim that they've taken photos where this warrior has mysteriously changed position. So they end up taking this down, bringing it back to British Columbia, and to see if it could be repaired. And they decided, no, it's too far gone. We need to preserve what we have. I hope it's on display somewhere. I hope it's in a warehouse even. I hope it exists still somewhere up in British Columbia. So what they ended up doing was they commissioned a new one to be made, a modern day one. It was carved, and I love this. It was carved in the 1980s by the great-great-grandson of the original carver of the original totem pole. And so it was eventually put into place in 1985. And apparently, as soon as it took its position, the paranormal activity started exactly again, including a base to top crack in the same exact position as where the big crack was in the original totem pole. People continued to say that the arms moved, and they would see it one day, it would be one orientation. They'd see it another day, it would be shaped differently. I've been there a handful of times. I've only ever seen it in the same position. But again, huge call out there. If anybody has any photos of this warrior in a different position, I would so love to see that. And there's a little interesting and funny footnote. This is one of the least publicized and least talked about of many reasons and curses behind the Cubs not having won the World Series in 100 and some odd years, 108 years, whatever it was. That because that totem pole, that warrior and that totem pole looked right down Addison Street towards Wrigley Field. So maybe that's why the Cubs have not won a World Series in so long. And of course, 2016 comes around, and even the angry, perhaps, totem pole warrior couldn't stop that juggernaut of a team that was the 2016 Cubs. So this is, I guess I will tell another one, since that only took about 15 minutes, and we don't have any chit chat back and forth yet. Oh, I didn't do a comment of the day. I forgot about that. So in lieu of that, today was actually a tie. If you go to whatsyourghoststory.com, well, first off, go there. That's a great place to go. But also go to facebook.com/whatsyourghoststory, which is where you can suggest what I will talk about in upcoming presentations. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about Los Angeles. I had the absolute pleasure to do the Los Angeles Hauntings Ghost Tour for a couple of years. I mean, I began it, I wrote it, and I conducted all but one of the couple hundred tours that it was just an amazing experience. So tomorrow I'm going to be talking about LA haunts, LA ghost stories, and maybe some of my favorite moments from giving the tours. But after L, I'm totally open to anybody's suggestion. So the other one, so this tied actually today. We had a tie between talking about the totem pole or talking about Kansas ghost stories. And I really have not spent very much time in Kansas. I've only really gone through the state, mostly just driven through the state. However, when I drive through the state, I try to drive through, it's Compton, Kansas, which is where Stull Cemetery is. And I'm going to take a beverage time out right now. If you got a couple of seconds here to Google one of the most iconic, and it's not celebrated as much as it was when the internet was new. I mean, you go back 10 years and this was a really hot location to talk about, but I just don't see people covering it so much anymore. But Stull Cemetery. All right. I hope you also in that chug. I hope you guys also went to Instagram to look up What's Your Ghost Story, because we try to keep that somewhat up to date. We post there more than anywhere else about whatever interesting location I'm visiting. And I'll be in New York soon. If anybody has any places in Lower Manhattan that I should check out. Last time I was out there, I went to the Chelsea Hotel, and I'm excited to go back and try to see what's going on there. They're doing a lot of renovations at the time, but of course that's where Sid killed Nancy, allegedly. And that's a big hot button debate issue. That would be something really fun to make the focus of a paranormal investigation. But the Ghostbusters Firehouse was in that area, in that neighborhood as well. So I'll be going to some cool places. But if you have any place in Lower Manhattan and the Tribeca area specifically, tell me about it. So Stull Cemetery. This is a place that if you are followers of the TV show Supernatural, you probably already know about it, because they regard the place as being a very important, spooky, demonic, satanic location. So what it is, this is small farm cemetery, really in the middle of nowhere. It's the nearest big town is Topeka, Kansas, which is a cute little town still. But even that's not very close. And it is, you don't happen across it. You have to be going there. It's not on the way to much. But it had this big stone church. I shouldn't say big, but a stone church at the top of a hill. And legend began to circulate that twice a year, the devil himself would emerge here at this cemetery. And some claim that he came out of a cellar that was beneath the church, and that the staircase into the ground is still there. And it was definitely a Halloween night. And it was also on the night of, I can't remember which equinox it is, if it was coming into spring or coming into fall. But this is the place where the devil himself would hang out. And it said that this is such a believed and accepted thing that the Pope himself, if he was flying to or over America, would instruct his pilots to definitely avoid the Stull area, to not cross that airspace. And there's I love urban legends, because they cite, anytime you see that written, they talk about how it was cited in a Time magazine article, which of course that article does not exist. If we would have found it by now, we've been looking. And of course, if you were going to cite this awesome piece of news, you would say in the September 1987 issue, you'd nail it down because that's awesome. So that's not real, but still, it's fascinating. And I love places that have stories and legends behind them like that. And it was kind of just a place where you heard so many bizarre stories. Now, my favorite one is at the church, which the roof, this is a very, very old church. The roof had caved in over the years and now was just the shell of a building. It was not used for services or anything. It was just this stone church. And actually, the band in the 90s, Urge Overkill, had a photo of that church on the cover of one of their albums. It was said that if it rained out, no drop of rain, or if it snowed out, no drop of snow would enter the church. So if it was pouring, run into that church, even though there was no roof, you would still be bone dry. And then in real life, one day that church was just bulldozed. It was rubble. Nobody claimed to have seen it fall down. Nobody knows why that church that stood for so long, it didn't begin to slowly weather away. It just one day was a pile of rubble, which is how it exists today. There were so many questions over this, and I think in time that we did finally have an answer, which is that one of the local neighbors, a farmer, took his tractor, drove it in, and tore down the church of his own volition without talking to the owner. The owner of the property claimed no knowledge. He had no idea what the heck happened there. And it's not an abandoned place. There are still new burials. It is an in-use, active place, even though obviously you couldn't use the church, but still it's kind of a beautiful, iconic landmark and, pretty limestone bricks, stone brick, of course. So I'm guessing that the farmer bulldozed the church to try to get curiosity seekers to stop coming out and maybe busying up their small town where nothing else was happening. Anyway, not to sound too mean or condescending just then, but honestly, but at what cost? That is considered holy ground, right? Sacred ground. A church is built. It's not just, signed off on by the housing inspector. It actually gets a blessing and it is considered holy land. There has to be something bad about bulldozing a church without any type of permission from any kind of governing body. And I don't know what the typical process is for tearing down a church, but I would assume that there must be some sign off from some bishop, cardinal somewhere or something like that. Anyway, so it's really fascinating too. I love it because it's so urban legendy, but then there's so many little moments that make you feel like, well, what the hell? Why did it shake out like that? So the idea being that the devil will appear on the night at midnight of Halloween, it would start to draw so many people. And if you're just joining us, I see the numbers changing. I'm talking about Stull Cemetery in rural Kansas. I got done talking about the totem pole a little bit earlier, but we're going to another K, and the K is for Kansas. The idea that the devil was going to appear at this cemetery, the church of the cemetery at midnight on Halloween night, started to draw out crowds, big crowds full of people. So much so that you needed crowd control. And eventually, one year, a local news crew said, well, you know what? Let's debunk this. I mean, this is a news story. People are coming out to it. Let's go. We will be there. We will be on site. We are going to witness the devil not show up. And so they had permission from the property owners. They set up camp. They had their cameras and lights and were hanging out. And then around 11:30 or so at night, the local police told them that they had to go. Even though they had permission to be there, the local police made them leave. Like, we were so close to having a real recording of what happens at midnight on Halloween at this location. And then at the last minute, the local police made them leave. What are they hiding? It's so hard to not come to that conclusion. Obviously, I mean, I shouldn't say obviously. We don't know. We don't know what's going on. Is this another Hellfire Club type of place, like we were just talking about in the letter I, where these local politicians were doing weird stuff in this place just outside of Dublin? But so anyway, that's fascinating. I found that interesting, and the interest in this area has started to fade away since that time. There was one person who claimed that I'm trying to remember if it was a person or just an article. I think it was on a skeptic website that wrote an article, and he claimed that the author of this article claimed that he talked to a professor at the University of Kansas, and this University of Kansas professor was trying an experiment to manifest, to create an urban legend, and to see if it would take off, take a life of its own. But this person that wrote this article does not cite who this is, when this was. I think they cited that the professor got it listed in a college newspaper, and that's how word spread. So the skeptic has to do just as good a job as the believers do when trying to prove something. This article does not list the name of the professor. It would be amazing to post the article in full from the college newspaper that cites the professor as a source, but they don't do that at all. But it's so easy to say, like, oh, well, that's the reason. Case closed, move on. But show me everything. And I'm not saying that's not true, but I'm still saying everybody's got to do their work. Whether no matter what side you believe on in anything, you have to show your sources. You have to try to get to the bottom of it. And if this person, writing for the Skeptic website, got to the bottom of it, that's awesome and huge. But you haven't solved it until you actually show your work, if you will. So Greg and Dana Newkirk, who anybody watching this might be aware of, they run the Traveling Museum of the Weird, where they take cursed objects from event to event and tell the stories, and they do their own research and experimentation. Really fun people with lots of fun stories. And you could look this up if you do a search for, probably if you just do a search for Stull Cemetery. I found it pretty easily. I stumbled across it. It was when they were doing their Week in Weird series. It was the name of the website as well. So they arrived. They had, just like me, they'd always heard of Stull Cemetery and wanted to go. One day they were on a cross-country trip, and they saw, well, hey, we're not too far away. Let's swing by and see what's going on, see what this place is all about. They drove in, and this is on video. They drove in, beautiful sunny day. They drove around, and random places of the cemetery were on fire. Smoke coming up, orange flames, small, smoldering fires, but just patches all over the place. Unbelievably weird. There's, it's not a controlled burn. I mean, this is a place that's still manicured, so the lawn gets mowed. It's not all overgrown grass or anything. They didn't see any fires going in the area. So what in the world is going on? How odd is that? And I talked to them. Actually, if you were, you can check out on the website here on my YouTube channel. I interviewed Greg Newkirk about that experience. And I can't remember if he said it in my interview with him, but in talking with him, he said they were too freaked to get out of the car. So even though they'd never been there, they'd always wanted to go. The fact that it was in flames, small flames, but flames, made them a little too freaked out to even make that enough of a pit stop to exit their vehicle. Now, pause. It's been a long day of working and editing. My eyes are dried out, and so is my mouth right now. I had the great opportunity to go there on a drive back. I was driving back from the West Coast. Like, oh man, Stull's on the way. Absolutely, we're going. And I was with a quick shout out to Wendy Lynn Stotts, who's out becoming an even better drummer out in California right now. She was with me. We drove in. It was a rainy, gray day, so no flamage going on. And this is several years after Greg and Dana Newkirk were at Stull Cemetery. Wendy and I get out. We park. We're walking around, and we see that there are scorch marks all over the ground. These bizarre shapes. It's not like a big bonfire was in one place, but just randomly there's areas of Stull Cemetery that had been burned. And again, thinking back to the idea that Satan himself emerges here, it seems like he doesn't wipe off his feet on the floor mat before then walking around the area. We have no idea what it is. I've never seen anything like that. It's so bizarre. I've been back. I was actually just there a month ago, and I did not see the scorch marks again. So it's something to keep an eye on. Something that was weird when we were there, we could see that the little bit of the church that's still in place, intact, which, I mean, we're talking 6 inches off the ground, there were scratch marks all over it. as if an animal maybe was scratching at it, or somebody with some sort of a chisel or something. It was very strange. I have no idea what that is either. Just throwing it out there in case anybody knows anything. But most of these Stoll Cemetery stories are really of the urban legendy variety. We haven't heard anything about people getting EVPs or odd photos. It's a place that I want to have a serious, with permission, overnight investigation with a small crew and gear. I don't know. I just think it's a really fascinating location, and I love how many stories there are around it. And it's funny that something that could be so famous just 10 years ago or so in this internet age, and then really drop off entirely to the point that most people don't even know about Stoll Cemetery. But anyway, thank you guys for watching or listening. If you got this open in the background, I'm Scott Marcus. What'sYourGhostStory.com is the website. All over social media as well. What's Your Ghost Story? And be part of the community. It's all about your ghost story. Share your story, comment on other people's stories. And we build this community. We share information. And have a great Wednesday. And I will be back later on this calendar day to talk about Los Angeles. And whatever I talk about after LA, you tell me. Thanks.